knew the world would not be the same. Few people laughed. Few people cried. Most people were silent. I remembered the line from the Hindu scripture, the Bhagavad Gita. Vishnu takes on his multi-armed form and says, "Now I am become death, the destroyer of worlds."
On July 16th, 1945, Trinity changed the world. The largest explosion humanity had ever witnessed, the equivalent of 25 kilotons of TNT, lit up the sky like the sun had touched down on Earth. This event changed the course of war and sparked fear in the eyes of men in a way that no other moment in history had before. Even today, nuclear war is still very much a part of our collective consciousness. And while it's been nearly 100 years since an atomic bomb has been used in a war, the threat has always been there. I mean, the last confirmed nuclear test was done by North Korea in 2017. That's just 5 years ago. Now, you'd think with a weapon that powerful, capable of that much devastation, that the military would be incredibly careful in how they handle said weapons. And while they are, accidents do happen. And the last thing you want to hear is that there was an accident involving a nuclear bomb. But would you believe me if I told you it's happened 32 times since 1950? Even more terrifying, quite a few of those bombs have never been recovered. The first Broken Arrow took place February 13th of 1950, just off the Pacific coast of British Columbia, which is where I happen to live, so that's awesome. A B-36 was performing a training mission with a Mark IV atomic bomb on board, a weapon comparable to the Fat Man bomb that was detonated over Nagasaki. The point of the training mission was to take off from Yeltsin Air Force Base near Alaska, get to San Francisco, which was its target, and then land safely in Carswell Air Force Base in Texas. Shortly after takeoff, ice began to build up on the plane's fuselage, causing strain on the engines, which ultimately led to a failure and the plane began to fall. As is protocol to ensure a bomb doesn't fall into enemy hands, the Mark IV was dropped over the Pacific, and according to surviving crew members, exploded over the ocean. Thankfully, because it was in fact a training mission, the bomb was missing its plutonium core, so it wasn't quite capable of creating a nuclear explosion. However, the bomb still housed a ton of uranium and explosive compound. The B-36 bomber would end its descent on Mount Colleget. To this day, the remains of the weapon and 5 of the 17 crew members have never been recovered. Just 6 years after the Mount Colleget incident, a B-47 left MacDill Air Force Base in Florida en route to Ben Guerir Air Force in Morocco. On board were 2 nuclear cores. During an attempt at an aerial refueling, the plane disappeared at 14,000 feet in the clouds over the Mediterranean Sea and was never heard from again. To this day, the plane, the nuclear cores, and the crew, Captain Robert H. Hodgin, Captain Gordon M. Inslee, and Second Lieutenant Ronald L. Kurtz, have never been recovered. However, because the nuclear cores were not combined with the necessary parts to create an atomic bomb, there was no chance of an accidental explosion. As of today, the US military has not disclosed what type of bombs these were, but it's likely they were Mark 15 thermonuclear weapons, which were commonly carried by B-47s. Just off the coast of Tybee Island, near Savannah, Georgia in 1958, a B-47 carrying a 15 megaton nuclear bomb collided midair with an F-86 fighter plane during a practice exercise. During the B-47's descent, the crew was told to jettison the bomb over the ocean, where it disappeared into the open waters of the sea in the Wassaw Sound, never to be recovered. Now, originally, the government told everyone that that weapon was fitted with a dummy trigger and wasn't capable of a nuclear explosion. However, in 1966, a document was declassified 40 years after the accident in 1994, detailing a congressional testimony by Assistant Secretary of Defense W.J. Howard, who stated that the bomb was in fact a fully functional nuclear bomb complete with its nuclear capsule. So really what it comes down to is we just don't know for sure, which is pretty horrifying. Now, while the last 3 Broken Arrow events didn't quite put the world at risk of a nuclear explosion, that we know of anyway, the 4th Broken Arrow event of 1961 was an entirely different story. A B-52 carrying 2 Mark 39 thermonuclear bombs was flying over the skies of North Carolina at around midnight of January 24th. During a scheduled aerial refueling, the plane's commander, Major Walter Scott Tulloch, was told that there was a fuel leak in the plane's right wing. The refueling was called off and Major Tulloch was ordered to keep the B-52 in a holding pattern and burn off fuel. However, once the plane reached its holding altitude, they quickly realized that the leak had gotten far worse. So bad, in fact, that they had dumped 37,000 pounds of fuel in less than 3 minutes. In a last-ditch effort to land, the plane headed towards North Carolina's Seymour Johnson Air Force Base, but it was hopeless. Major Tulloch ordered the crew of the doomed plane to abandon it. As the crew of 8 men began to eject, the plane exploded and tore apart as it careened towards the Earth, throwing debris over a 2-square-mile area, which just so happened to include one of the 2 thermonuclear bombs. Now, the first bomb had its safety parachute deployed before impact and landed in a tobacco field, relatively undamaged, getting its chute caught in a tree during landing. What's terrifying is that at the time, the Pentagon stated that there was no threat of a nuclear detonation. This couldn't have been further from the truth. It was later discovered that of the 4 safety switches needed to activate the bomb, only 1 had not activated. North Carolina was 1 safety switch away from a thermonuclear explosion. Imagine a world where an entire area of the US was nothing more than an abandoned wasteland. The other weapon, however, stayed with the plane and struck the ground with so much force that it buried itself nearly 200 feet underground. The undamaged nuke stuck in the tree was recovered fairly easily, but the buried one, not so much. When the tail of the bomb was found 20 feet under the ground, Lieutenant Jack Reveley, the explosive ordnance expert tasked with the recovery of the bombs, was quoted as saying, "Until my death, I will never forget hearing my sergeant say, 'Lieutenant, we found the arm safe switch.' And I said, 'Great.' He said, 'Not great, it's on arm.' Both weapons had come terrifyingly close to being triggered. Throughout the course of 8 days, crew tried to recover the bomb but were only able to retrieve its core. Due to uncontrollable site flooding, it was decided to abandon the bomb, including the uranium and plutonium within it. The area was buried in concrete, and to this day, the Mark 39 weapon, capable of a 4-megaton explosion similar to that of the bomb used in the Operation Red Wing Cherokee test, is still buried beneath North Carolina. Just 4 years later, in December of 1965, an A-4E Skyhawk carrying a 1-megaton B-43 hydrogen bomb just kind of casually rolled off the side of the USS Ticonderoga during a training exercise and sank 16,000 feet into the Pacific Ocean, never to be seen again, along with the pilot, Lieutenant Douglas M. Webster. And I just picture the U.S. Department of Defense being like,
nobody's gonna know.
They're gonna know.
How would they know?
And didn't tell anyone this had happened until 15 years later in 1980 when they were like, "Oh yeah, sorry, we misplaced a hydrogen bomb, but don't worry, it was like 500 miles from land. No sweat." Turned out that was a lie. When the bomb disappeared, the USS Ticonderoga was returning from a bombing mission in Vietnam and was actually only 80 miles off the Japanese coast. As you can probably imagine, Japan wasn't too happy about this, and to this day the US still doesn't know where that bomb is. Our final Broken Arrow incident is that of the USS Scorpion, a nuclear attack submarine that mysteriously sank 400 miles off the southwest coast of the Portuguese Azores Islands in the spring of 1968. To this day, it's still not entirely known what caused the sinking of the Scorpion, but what is known is that along with the lives of nearly 100 crew members, 2 nuclear torpedoes were also lost, both capable of 250 kiloton explosive power. Now, there are many theories as to what happened to the Scorpion, ranging from structural failure to the Soviets to even one of the nuclear torpedoes detonating by accident, but it's not certain. And since the US Navy refuses to reinvestigate the sinking, it's likely the true story of what happened to the Scorpion and her crew are never going to come to light. It's terrifying to think how easily the US has managed to lose some of the most destructive weapons the world has ever known. And this is just the nukes that they didn't recover. If I did a video on just Broken Arrow events involving any nuclear weapon, I could make this video hours long. This happens way more often than it should. What's even more horrifying to think about is that these lost nuclear weapons, all the chances the world almost changed forever. This is just the US that we're talking about. Need I remind you that the US isn't the only country with nuclear bombs, and God only knows how many of these things Russia or China or North Korea or any of the other countless other countries with nuclear capabilities have lost throughout the decades. So just live your life, folks, because God knows you could be sitting on a nuke right now and not even know it.